Great Otway National Park. And this is what we like to see. The old sign unceremoniously just dropped on the ground. Goddamn feral activist bloody did put this sign up. That's the way we like it. Goodbye logging.
It is I have to say, a great day.
This has been an incredible community effort.
It was a hard-fought campaign by environmentalists that secured the park's future.
And Victoria's largest coastal national park will soon be a reality. Next week, Parliament will establish a 100,000 hectare reserve from Cape Otway to Anglesey.
As he announced the creation of a new national park, taking in some of Victoria's most spectacular forests and coastline.
This is the biggest national park Victoria has on the coastline.
And from coastal heathland on the Great Ocean Road to temperate rainforests further inland, the Great Otway National Park is home to 43 threatened species of flora and fauna. At least 12 are found nowhere else in the world.
Fulfilment of a promise the Premier made at the last election.
At the moment I can announce that the logging in the Otways will stop if we are elected to government in the future.
Green groups have welcomed the announcement, which spells the end for logging in the Otways by 2008.
Basically, they were clear fell logging 3 square kilometres of this forest every year, so systematically they were just going to destroy practically all the natural environment in the state forest area. I found out that the government was prepared to end the logging in the Otways actually about 2 days before it was announced. I was rung up by a senior advisor to the Environment Minister, and I answered the phone and he basically announced, "Congratulations, Simon, you have influenced government," and casually rattled off what the policy was going to be, which was the logging ban and the new national park. And that although a lot of people were shocked to hear it at the time, that fundamental changes in policy were occurring, on another level, having worked on all those community campaigns, for me it didn't feel so much like a shock. This place here, Triplet Falls, all around here were quite a number of areas that had been scheduled to be clear fell logged. The announcement to ban logging meant that the Regional Forest Agreement, which had been signed only 2 years earlier, was basically torn up. That decision caused a bit of a shockwave with the entire native forest logging industry through Australia, because the RFAs were supposed to be like a contract, an agreement that locked in and guaranteed logging for 2 decades, but basically the government was prepared now to abandon that agreement in favour of what the community actually wanted. A lot of people were angry that we'd saved the Otways in the environment movement. Like, people in the Wilderness Society and the Greens political party were angry that the Otways were saved, and they were literally campaigning against the creation of a Great Otway National Park, arguing that it wasn't good enough for the Labor Party. It wasn't a good enough outcome. Don't vote for the Labor Party, vote for us. The Otway Rangers Environment Network was a group of individuals and organisations who cared for the Otways.
Why don't they tell us why our E. coli reading went up to 2,000 in 1974, just after they started clear felling for logging?
There was everyone from forest activists to Collins Street businessmen, conservative, Liberal voters. We were a non-politically aligned organisation, so we had a very broad spectrum of supporters.
My ancestors saved as much as that they could. Now it's up to all you young people who can reach government departments.
Once the Labor Party had a policy to save the Otways, as much as they were prepared to do, they were then a part of the Oran network. And so hence their resources were available for us to get that united outcome into reality. And of course that then, again, as I was saying, put us into conflict with the Greens political party and the Wilderness Society. Having spent 5 years with the Wilderness Society and learning, and Friends of the Earth, and learning, I suppose, the ins and outs of non-violent direct action with, the actual blockades and motivating people to get involved with direct action, deciding then to do the Otways, but coming into the Otways with those skills, it was just a matter of picking up the threads of old campaigns that had happened in the Otways before by finding the people that had, associated with the old campaigns and saying, hey, we want to fire this campaign up again, we want to get it turbocharged, we've got experience, we've done stuff, we want to use... I think from the start we had the view, let's do direct action, let's get stuck into it. But it was also a whole different ball game in the Otways because it wasn't a distant frontier. You could go into the forest and within an hour be down on Polo Bay, at a cafe or eating pizza, which just simply wasn't an option in more remote areas of East Gippsland. So, and the community just wasn't hostile. If you were, looked like a forest protester and walked down the street of Orbost, you'd be assaulted. But in a Polo Bay or a lawn, no one cared. So it was a completely different atmosphere, a lot more relaxed in that way. But we came into it with that hardcore. We know what it's like to do it really tough, to have to drive hours and hours just to get to a place. And we just looked at the Otways. We've got to be able to stop logging in a place like this. If we can't do it in the Otways, we can't do it anywhere. But the reality was that John never came to the forest very often. He stayed pretty much as a completely reliable person to be able to contact and do media at any, I could ring John at 11 o'clock at night, knowing that he would be up and alert to do a press release and set it up for automatic transmission on a computer in the wee hours of the morning. And getting John's advice about how to keep the message on track, not be throwing off message with what we were trying to achieve. John had excellent understanding of the, I suppose, the public relations industries and having that centering ability with the campaign. I think to some extent, because John wasn't always in the action, he was actually a step back and able to sort of more clearly, objectively analyse what was going on. What we were promoting is what we call non-timber forest values, particularly water. And one of the big components of our campaign was, I suppose, educating the public about the impacts of logging on their domestic water supplies. Water, when you clear fell log forests, the young regrowth forests actually consume more water than, say, the old growth forest that you'll find growing through here. There'd been some studies done in Melbourne's water catchments which showed that the value of the water lost was 3 to 4 times greater than the value of the timber, so that economically, putting aside all the fluffy animals and the majestic trees and all this beautiful forests, just on a pure economic, rationalist business point of view, the water output from the catchments was worth more than allowing the logging. Those sort of economic arguments carried a lot of weight in government and in the public, and it sort of created the whole not in my backyard scenario for Geelong, because Geelong's water supply was basically being logged during a drought, and we were able to, I suppose, have a conversation with the average person on the street about how logging was actually undermining the water that was running out of their taps, in their kitchen, in their showers, in their bath. It was a self-interest issue, and it was a personal issue because it was their water supply. With arguments about biodiversity, endangered species, there's a lot of public sympathy for that, but it's not personal.
I'm Jenny, and I got involved probably about 2 years into the overall campaign. I was someone who had holidayed with my family down at Wye River for my entire life. I come from, say, 4 generations from down at Wye River. I tell you right now, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. The whole campaign is probably one of the most empowering and fantastic things that has ever happened. And it was unbelievably hard at times, sleepless. It had quite a big toll on my personal life in the sense that I was exhausted, that I was obsessed, that I loved the thrill of the roller coaster ride. It was a shock for my husband. It was hard on the family. Oh, it had quite a big toll. I actually met Simon in this house. He just turned to me at some point and said, well, if you want to do a petition, maybe that'd be a good idea. And it was one of those beginnings that you don't realise is a beginning, but it was the beginning. Simon came down to Wye River one day and he said, do you want to go to see a coop? And I said, what's a coop? I realised I really knew nothing. And we went up to the forest and he started to show me around. We were with a biologist. It's sort of not in my backyard came up so strongly. That is the point where it went beyond petitions and various things to organising all of Wye River for an open day at the back of up the back of Wye River, which ended up being what was called the Mud Road Coop. And the shock also was that they weren't just going to do one 25 to 30 hectare coop, they were going to do 5 of them. And Wye Rivers were really small. The whole valleys were really small. And so hearing that they were going to do about 125 hectares of this tiny valley, our valley, was a shock. And after we came back, having learnt this, I got together with Greg Hocking and Cheryl Smith, and we sat down and we decided to make the Wye River Residents Action Group. And my underlying concern was sort of summed up in the word feral, which I thought was a brilliant word of how to dismiss real concerns that young people have who have the guts to go up trees, who put their lives on the line, and basically be dismissed. Because as long as you've got the loggers on one side and the ferals on the other side, they're all in the forest and we can forget about them, right? I completely agreed with what they did, but as long as the Herald Sun was going to keep calling them ferals, I thought, well, that is almost doomed. Because I thought what we have to do is get to the middle classes.
Where we're at in terms of the process. Simon.
G'day. The Otway Ranges Environment Network's been campaigning in the Otways.
I got involved through Wye River. Simon Birrell ran an information day at the famous Mud Road Coop up behind Wye River. I went up there with hundreds of other people from Wye River, and like anyone else down there was just shocked at what was going on. You wouldn't have thought it, you wouldn't have expected it to be successful at the outset. You would have thought there was no chance. And we got there, and that was in the teeth of deep opposition from TWIS and the Greens because of their, in my opinion, faulty strategy of trying to get an all-encompassing deal for a big problem, which is forestry issues in Tasmania, forestry issues in Victoria, rather than our approach, which was incremental gains. No doubt Simon told you, but I remember him telling me that one of the reasons he swapped from East Gippsland to Otways was he thought you'd be able to get a result. We're able to get a result because of his skill in keeping a unified group together. Now, it was, a very diverse group of people by the end. Very diverse, you had leading psychiatrists and leading Collins Street economists and people who lived in the bush, in shanties, and all points in between, all working together, all really trusting each other.
We approached all the councils in southwestern Victoria, the Geelong City Council, Surf Coast Shire, Warrnambool City Council, Moyne Shire, and we basically gave them a presentation where we argued the case why logging should be banned simply from the water point of view. And we asked those councils to pass resolutions condemning logging, and they all did, and it was unanimous. It was both, quite often you get a Labor-Liberal mix on council. It was always a bipartisan support. And of course, once you go and get councils to pass resolutions supporting a logging ban, all of a sudden you transform from maybe being a feral radical to being respectable. You're respected in the community because if the councils have analysed it and accepted the outcome, then you must be proper people.
But it was because of that disparate group that could all be unified. At the end of the day, Chris Tippler said we always had a loaded, and we got into trouble for using this, but I always remember it. We always had a loaded gun on the table, which was that the forest activists that we dismissed as the ferals, the forest activists, the people who would actually go out and put themselves on the line, could not be controlled.
1 log, 2 log, 3 log, old log, all day up and down the road.
It's looking great.
None of all these people seem to feel like a man.
Birds and the animals that used to live in that majestic old giant. Count the log trucks from the plateau. Early morning, 1 log load, 1 log, big log, old log.
Well done, guys. That was quite impressive. No.
Well, here we are again in the Otways. Basically, what we've got here is an old car body, as you can see. It's got a hole cut in the bottom here, and dig a big hole in the road, and with a little bit of metal at the bottom. Stick your arm through the car into the road. You can't move the car because your arm's in the road. can't move your arm because the car's in the way. Pretty straightforward really, but seems to work pretty well. Been here since about 10 o'clock, it's 3 o'clock now, so it's not bad. And when they're finished with this, if they finish with this,
You can go down for a swim.
I can go down for a swim when they've just got the bipod to contend with up the road. I reckon I'm going to be here for a while.
My name is David Nicastro, and my principal role was as an on-the-ground tactician and rigger. A rigger principally is someone who uses climbing gear and pulleys and so forth to set up different structures, or such as tree sits or tripods and bipods, to mobilise machinery or protect canopy from being felled. My first time in the Otways, I was probably about 22, and to step in an old growth forest was a cathartic experience. It was like stepping into a temple that I'd visited in Sicily back in the day, the same kind of scale, but this was still alive and living, and so many incredible animals and wildlife. Just realised that there was these majestic old growth forests out there that I'd never really seen or thought too much about, and just to stand there and beside me seeing 400- or 500-year-old giants just left on the ground to waste irked me really deeply, and it was almost a revelation for me that it was. I know it sounds kind of cliched or corny, but to me, I remember that moment precisely. It was a full moon, and I'm wandering through the forest, and I just started to cry, and just thought, this is wrong. This is not right. I'm no scientist, but this really is an injustice that's been committed, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I was hooked. Well, my involvement with Oran was, in a way, as an associate through Future Rescue, organising and getting people to the forest and skill sharing and training them up to be able to undertake roles where they just didn't arrive to a forest and just, okay, got herded around mindlessly, but they felt empowered to contribute towards a campaign that was really important. People's lives are on the line, and if you don't do your job properly, then the chance for someone hurting themselves rather seriously is quite good. A monopole is essentially like a telephone pole with cables coming off it, at least a minimum of 4 of them, that assist in keeping the structure stable. And it's precariously poised just on a pivotal point, usually on the track of a log loader or some other form of machinery, to make it very risky for, or basically the person up there puts their life in jeopardy in order to make it very difficult for them to be removed without the use of large, expensive, heavy machinery.
Okay, so the point where I broke off and run away! Dropping down there, the little clip's got jammed. I was going to oil it this morning, but never got around to it.
Way down there is the ground. Probably about 35-40 metres away. Traders fear Otways logging is the headline in The Age. The lawn business community has joined the campaign against clear felling in the Otway Ranges, citing concern about the impact of logging on water catchments and tourism. So this is The Age yesterday. And just down there, we've got, where are we? There we go. The head of the Lawn Business Council. Oh, and I think that's actually the head councillor of the Surf Coast Shire, who's just brought us a big hamper of food. So there you have it. Community support at its best. And we get to sit back up here in the tree sit and read about it in the paper.
We're in a water catchment logging coupe, and a large group of loggers and their family arrived to, in a sense, beat us up and kick us out and send a strong signal that the RFA, was, from their point of view, a good thing, that we should butt out. And I was involved in rigging up some of the structures. We'd put a monopole on top of a log loader's tracks, and it was precariously balanced with maybe 8 cables. And the loggers arrived. I quickly shimmied up the monopole and sat there and then started to see people getting hit and screaming and violence around me, and then some of the loggers started to cut the cables which I was up, and I think we had about 3 left and it started to lean. My own friends were imploring me, saying, "Don't be an idiot, get down, they're going to kill you." And I was just in the shock of it, thinking, well, if they hurt me, it was probably going to help our campaign. And I just, probably stupidly now in hindsight, was prepared to be a martyr. They left me alone, kicked the car around a bit and walked off thinking this guy's loony, and I probably was. I really just didn't care. I was just one person and there was so much to be gained.
I'm Fftt and I was involved in the Otways campaign for about 18 months, 2 years. I'm a mother of 2. I have a beautiful little boy who's 6 and a little girl Zara who's 8. I guess one of my main roles on the ground as an activist was doing a lot of the police liaison, and we started a group called Future Rescue, and that was a very big part of the Otways campaign, and I guess that's probably one of my main roles. You know, I took my role in the forest campaigns to very much be talking to the loggers. You know, I grew up in the country, a lot of my friends were loggers, family generations of loggers, and I understand where that comes from. I understood that position of people feeling like their jobs were under threat, and sort of took on that role, as did a few other people as well, to try and diffuse that situation. So that day when we were attacked was fairly hard for me to deal with. I think I was probably traumatised and did suffer a certain level of post-traumatic stress afterwards. It was very hard to deal with. Like the attack on me myself was quite violent, but watching my friends being attacked, and you know, there was a few incidences. There was a guy up in Monopoly, people could have died that night. It was very violent. Witnessing that level of violence, you know, people's cameras were smashed. There was a lot of crying, screaming, yelling. There was a lot of abuse. It was very violent. There was a spectacle sort of going on where the loggers brought their wives and children in to look at what they were doing to us, and you know, I think there was every intention to seriously hospitalise and hurt quite a few people and really intimidate us. It was, you know, I think they talked about verging on riot, and it was definitely a very distressing situation to be in. I think I suffered a certain level of emotional trauma after that, and it was probably one of the low points in my whole time as an activist. I'd still like to consider myself an activist now, although I'm not involved so much with direct action, especially in the forests, but I've continued my involvement as an activist for political and social change for over 15 years now. So.
Okay, Bluey.
How you going, man? Who's that, Sus? Who's that? Who's that, babes? Hey?
How you going?
Good, mate. How are you? Yeah. Long time no see.
Is it McConnell, the guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was an interesting fellow, because rather than sort of arc up at us and tell us to, you know, clear off your greeny scum, he was quite into having a chat with us and dialogue, and was quite happy to stop work and sit down and have a cup of coffee with us. And
he was a logger?
Yeah, he owned all the logging equipment, and he was quite happy to sort of have that dialogue. And I think it was probably around one of those campfires that we met Bluey. And I also know someone else up here who knew Bluey as well and spoke highly of him. So.
Early in the piece in the 80s, 70s, logging was an industry. It was made. It was based on sawing timber for houses. I love timber. Let's get that as a base thing. I love timber, and as it come through the 80s and into the 90s, and wood chipping started to become industrialised in the full sense of the word, my attitude to the timber industry changed, because I could see that these guys that owned the chip mills weren't going to stop for anything. They just wanted everything, and paradoxically they owned the sawmills too. So all the good timber that could be used for sawing, they were chipping it all.
Native forest in the Otways was being clear fell logged, stored in these sort of log dumps, and then taken to Millicent in South Australia to be made into disposable tissue paper products, and sold to a company called Kimberly-Clark, who were basically turning the Otways into toilet paper, such as Kleenex, dunny rolls, and also into facial tissue products. So we ran a campaign called Don't Wipe Your Bum on the Otways, refuse to use Kleenex tissues. We did supermarket actions, we encouraged university campuses to boycott using Kimberly-Clark tissue paper products.
Clearing the shelves of tissues and toilet paper was their way of highlighting environmental concerns. They claim Kleenex products are destroying native forests.
We didn't damage any of the products, and when we were asked to leave, we left. One campus after the other started boycotting, and this campaign basically cost the company a lot of money. I think we worked out if one person in 10 stopped buying Kleenex, we could cost the company about $20 million per annum in lost sales. Within 2 years, basically Kimberly-Clark cancelled their licences to source wood chips from the Otways, and Kleenex was basically out of the Otways. And we declared victory. But it wasn't an end to logging, it just proved the point that the public won't buy native forest for low-grade products like Kleenex. No one in Oran held positions of power. If anyone ever did media, you were regarded as only a spokesperson, and I was often asked the question, are you the director or the president, or what's your position? And I would always reply, I'm nobody but a spokesperson for the organisation. The idea was to decentralise the power and to throw the responsibility of media and, I suppose, taking responsibility for what was happening in the forests back onto everybody. There wasn't a leader. This is everybody's forest. You get out there, you take initiative, you do stuff. Don't expect to be told what to do, and don't tell anyone else what to do. They were the sort of philosophies. And it was sort of an anarchistic model in a strange sort of way, but it worked very well. The conflict came with the peak environment groups and the Greens political party, because they kind of were seeking order and control to try to get us under their wing, but the fluid nature of the whole structure of how we're trying to deal with people made it very hard for anyone to get control of anything. And it was very funny, because it was often asked, you know, can I stop the protesters? Can I speak for them? I said, well, actually, I really can't. I can't control anybody. They're there saving the forests. If you want to talk and control them, go and talk to them. They know what they want. They don't want you logging the forests. And since I can't control them, you know, it's a community campaign. No one can speak for anybody. And that caused enormous problems for the department, for the government, because they're so used to hierarchy. They need someone who's in charge to direct all of the dialogue through, and they found it very hard to be able to work out how to manage this.
Future Rescue was very much a collective consensus-based activist organisation, and the way we made decisions was on everybody agreeing, and if there was a conflict or a point of disagreement, then we would come together as a group and try and work that out. And I guess we weren't as involved in the political process, probably a lot to do with how people physically looked and came across, and the fact we were more in the forests. And I guess you have to be able to walk a certain mainstream walk to be able to get the ears of government, and Simon very much had that through various connections. And yeah, I think in the end, I mean, it was various groups that were involved in doing it. Oran spearheaded a lot of it.
We sort of wanted to take some of the good experiences from those other environment groups and try to restructure things to get away from some of the negative issues that some of these other environment groups have. In particular, we certainly believed in the principle of consensus decision making, but then we didn't necessarily want to have endless meetings to get everyone to agree on a point. So there was a sort of an initiative-based system where people needed to respect other people's views, but you didn't need to go and get permission from anybody to go and do anything. If you had a good idea and you wanted to do it, then you were encouraged to do it. But on likewise, people weren't allowed to come to meetings and tell other people what to do. That sort of model was very good because it allowed a lot of flexibility with the people that became associated with the campaign.
The way Oran differed from some of the other groups is that it was very much driven by Simon's negotiations with the government in terms of how the outcomes were sort of pushed through that parliamentary process. Simon definitely had the ear of government at that time, and there was a process that we called contentious coups where different areas were listed and sort of negotiated off against, and a lot of activists at the time weren't particularly happy with that process and how that list came about. And I guess when your heart's in the forest and every tree that falls is taking that toll personally on you, it's pretty hard to actually sit there with a pen and paper and go, right, this tree, this bit stays, this bit goes, you know. And I think a lot of activists find that pretty hard to stomach, and there's different green groups on all spectrums of that scale. Some want no native forest logging whatsoever, others are prepared to work towards a compromise and go small steps at a time.
It was one thing for Steve Bracks in the Labor Party to announce the policy during a state election. We now had to get that Steve Bracks and his policy as a part of government so that it could be implemented. That, of course, created a lot of tension between some of the peak environment groups. The Greens political party took the view that we were undermining or taking votes away from the Greens candidates. And likewise, the Wilderness Society, which had been historically running a no native forest logging campaign across Australia, saw the Otways as an incremental gain, undermining their objective of a total ban on logging right across Australia, and that the fact that the government was only announcing an incremental gain was undermining their ultimate goal and strategy.
The Greens will win up to 15% of the vote at the state election, and whether those voters choose Labor or Liberal second will influence the outcome in a string of marginal seats.
And there wasn't much support for Labor either, despite its commitment to stop logging the Otways.
Bracks is the biggest wood chipper in this state's history. You know, saving 3% is a new step for them, but it's a long, long way to go.
Whether it is electorally popular or not, it's the right thing to do.
The Greens say without an end to the logging of old-growth forest and water catchment areas, they're likely to preference no one.
So both the Wilderness Society and the Greens political party became into conflict with Oran because Oran was here to save the Otways and not trying to fulfil these other objectives of these other organisations. People actually resigned from Oran, citing that we were literally doing the whole campaign simply for the benefit of trying to get the Labor Party elected, which I found very insulting. Like, I had done this campaign to save the forests, and I certainly hadn't done it to, you know, been arrested and gone through hell in the forest for years and years, solely for the purpose of promoting a political party.
Have you seen these famous how to vote cards? We printed these up at our expense. The Labor Party then got thousands of them, tens of thousands of them printed off and distributed amongst their inner suburban electorates, because it showed that they had a real point of difference between Liberal and Labor on this vital question of wood chipping, and that there was a credible conservation organisation, Oran, supporting them. Greens wouldn't, and inexcusably the Wilderness Society wouldn't. So that shows you the actual careerist nature of the formal Green organisations. We then had the extraordinary situation of, because we'd done a deal for the Otways, the Green political party then decided that it would not, incredibly enough, would not preference Labor in the seat of South Barwon. We just have an open an open card, which was a major act of treachery to the forests. I don't care about anything else. If you call yourself a Green and you had on the table two parties, one of which was offering to cease all logging on a phase-out basis with, you know, the terms that we all got, which was over 3 years, with a reference group controlling how that happened, with the VAC process to decide what the boundaries would be of a new national park, everything you could possibly want. On the Labor side and on the Liberal side, no change.
Will you match Labor's commitment to stop logging in the Otways?
Logging in the Otways is sustainable. I'll go with the scientific evidence.
That's a no.
That's a no.
We made 150,000 of these how to vote cards. One said Labor with a beautiful forest. One said Liberal with a Clearfell Coop. We didn't put the Greens on it because they weren't prepared to preference the Labor Party, so we just left them off. And then that was distributed to a lot of electorates. But how can we distribute? We don't have many people to do it. So they were given to the Labor Party people to distribute it on our behalf because we were all now wanting the same thing. And of course that was seen by people in the Greens as a betrayal because we were obviously using the Labor Party machine to get the message out about the Otways. But as far as we're concerned, that was legitimate because it was a pragmatic decision to defeat the Liberal Party because they made it absolutely clear that if they got into power, they would log the Otways to the year 2020, and now we were obliged to save the Otways.
Even though in a bona fide way we'd been to see the Liberal Party, famously been left sitting on the terrace in Parliament House by one spokesman, and then the next time really did get shown the time of day by Phil Honeywood, but he couldn't change Liberal policy. So that was the choice for the Greens Party for preferences, and they chose not to preference the Labor Party for arcane reasons. That shows you the actual nature of the Greens political party, which it would put very jeune understanding of political reality against saving the forests. Saving the forests. Look, it would have, every single member of Oran no doubt would have found that difficult, but if the reverse situation had been the case, if the Liberal Party, and we bona fide gave them every opportunity, if the Liberal Party had come out with a policy supporting the closing down of native forest logging in the Otways, and the Labor Party hadn't, then I would have been saying, well, we have to preference the Liberal Party.
Well, for me, the forests, you know, I suppose it's just a connection to the land. For me, the land itself is like a living entity that everything in it is us and we are it. And you know, we need the air, the water. Like the water, say, that flows through the rivers of the Otways, we consume it when we drink it. It makes up 80% of our body. So are we hence the forests ourselves because we're made up of it, you know, and that everything about us is connected to the natural world and vice versa. So as I suppose it's just, on one level I suppose you could call it a spiritual connection to the land, to places, to time, to landscapes, and I suppose a respect for the diversity in the different environments I suppose it's just an issue of love, pure love it for as it is.
I think the biggest achievement was the National Park, and that was a pivotal moment for me. I'd been living in North Queensland in an Aboriginal community for a number of years, and Simon sent me an invitation, or the government sent me an invitation to attend, and I actually came back 4,000 kilometres to be there that day and to celebrate that moment, and that was huge. You know, as an environmental activist, there's a lot of heartache and not a lot of wins, and this was really successful. And that was an incredible moment, you know, and it was quite ironic at the time that the loggers were the ones there protesting with placards and banners, and there was Otway's bottles of wine, and they chauffeured us in a 5-star bus, and all the activists and all the locals who were involved got to celebrate that achievement, and I've yet to do anything like that again. I know there's been a big win recently in East Gippsland around some of the national parks, but the celebration for that national park was a completely different level. This was marquees and government personalities, and you know, everybody was celebrating. I think the government actually pitched it as a really positive as well, which was quite interesting too, I think.
As someone who's involved with this, you can't do it, you can't commit or keep going if you don't do it for love. And if I said what was I doing it for, I would say I did it for the love of my grandmother, who, you know, and my grandfather, who's written beautiful poems about Wye River, and I did it for my son. It's that sense of working with people who are equally passionate about something. I remember we had a meeting where there was all of us, and I think it was this guy Martin, who's an advisor, and the advisor turned to us at one point. He said, "If I had bureaucrats like you, I'd be home and hosed." That you hear something that just stands out like a truth, because that's what we were. We were unbelievably enthusiastic and determined.
At booths I was having hilarious arguments with the Greens candidates, and also, you know, it's very pleasing, a lot of it, with old loggers and all sorts of people, with the sitting Liberal member's mother, and various things. And then to have this overwhelming landslide and have the result delivered as promised. I mean, it was very rewarding, and as I say, every time I drive down to Wye and drive past one of those signs, you know, they can't take that away from us. I just wish they'd listen. I wish, when I say they, I wish the careerists in the conservation movement would take note of how it was achieved.
It is a national park that is now exactly nine times the size of the old national park, and protects old growth forests and threatened fauna and flora. It's a national park that will, together with initiatives such as the Otway Tourism Plan, the Great Otway, the Great Ocean.
Please. Alright, thanks buddy.
You're the one that said $20 and we get him out as we're driving off. Yeah, we get him out as we're driving off.
This is where the fun starts. Bring it on, Monkey Brothers! Fucking legend, mate. Nice work. Yeah, 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 little bird. Woo, 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 woo. Fuck yeah. And up the pole. Did the fucking dash. Scampered up there. All these do to no avail. Cheers to you and cheers to me, and may we never disagree.